The Witch King of Angmar is the lord of the beings known as the Nazgul. He is Sauron's most feared and deadly servant. Who he was before receiving one of the 9 rings of power is now just a distant memory. He has no will of his own and only focuses on his master's bidding. Out of all of the evil beings in Middle-earth, no one except Sauron himself is feared more than the Witch King of Angmar, the one they say that no living man can kill. But how much do we really know about this Black Captain? Let's find out.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
The Witch King is one of the most interesting characters that Tolkien ever created, for many reasons, in and out of the lore. Unlike most evil figures from the early ages of Middle-earth, the Witch King arrives into the story with no history, no form, no life, just a purpose. So essentially everything we know about him is developed during the narrative, as there is almost no explanation of a full backstory. We know that he was once a king of men, and it's pretty commonly accepted that he was likely originally from Numenor. Being that it's stated that 3 of the 9 Nazgul are from Numenor, and as Numenorians are considered to be the superior race, it makes sense that the most powerful of the 9 would be of that race. Now, as we know, the forging of the Rings of Power began around 1500 years into the Second Age. In the year 1600 of the same age, Sauron wore the One Ring for the first time, and less than 100 years later, the War of the Elves and Sauron began, and during this time he recovered the 9 Rings of Power, which he then gave to the 9 rulers of men, or Lords of Power. The mightiest of these men was most likely a king of some sort and a powerful sorcerer. Apart from this, very little is known about their lives before receiving the rings. So we know from the moment they had their rings, their power, wealth, and most importantly, lifespans, all increased under the rings' corrupting abilities. They all eventually fall into the shadow world and become Nazgul, ring wraiths, completely enslaved to the will of their master, the Dark Lord Sauron. Throughout most of the remainder of the Second Age, the Nazgul were used as Sauron's main servants, and the Witch King was the commander of his army. He also fought in the Battle of the Last Alliance against elves and men. However, when Sauron was defeated at the battle and had the ring cut from his hand, the Nazgul were no longer able to maintain a physical form, as their power is connected to Sauron's. When he is weak, they are weak. When he is strong, so are they. None of the Nazgul were then seen for over 1,000 years, but Sauron had soon taken form and founded the fortress of Dol Guldur in Mirkwood. This of course meant that the 9 were able to return to Middle-earth. The Witch King set about destroying the Dunedain, as the Dunedain were the descendants of the Faithful from Numenor, a race of people that Sauron had considered responsible for his downfall. If you're interested in learning more about the Dunedain, we released a video on them last week, check that out if you're interested. Now, by this time, the northern kingdom of Arnor had already split into 3 sections: Arthedain, Rhudaur, and Cardolan. This was due to civil wars. The Witch King chose this moment of weakness to start a conflict within the kingdom. He established his own realm of Angmar and launched his war campaign from there. After several conflicts between the Witch King and the Dunedain, they labelled the leader of the Nazgul with the title Witch King of Angmar. He began to conquer all of Arnor one area at a time. He began with invading Rhudaur, defeating its king and replacing him with one of his own allies. With his troops, he then moved into a fortress of Amansul, better known as Weathertop, and burnt the tower, killing the king of Arthedain in the process. He then led his army into Cardolan and conquered that too. The only area that was still standing was the western kingdom of Arthedain. A few attempts at fully invading had failed, but the Witch King continued his war for hundreds of years, eventually sending evil wights to the Barrow-downs to prevent the full rebirth of the kingdom. It wasn't then until 1974 of the Third Age that the Witch King claimed victory. He captured Fornost Erain, the capital of Arthedain. With its collapse, the last remnants of the kingdom of Arnor were destroyed. The Witch King then took up his throne in Fornost. However, the following year an army from Gondor, led by Eomer, along with elves from Lindon, and some remnants of the Dunedain marched upon the Witch King, starting the Great Battle of Fornost. This battle actually plays a huge part in the history of this character, and is personally my favourite part of his story. So the Battle of Fornost would take place on the plains west of it, near Lake Evendim. Gondor had sent its cavalry into the hills to wait in ambush. The rest of its army met the enemy in battle. The cavalry were then able to strike the Angmar forces from the rear. This was the turning point. Realising that he was outnumbered and outmatched, the Witch King chose to flee. but an army from Rivendell, led by the great Glorfindel, came from the south to prevent his escape. They then destroyed what was left of the Witch King's army. The Witch King challenged Eomer to single combat. The Gondorian leader agreed, and when he moved forward to attack, his horse panicked out of fear and threw him to the ground. Seeing an opportunity, the Witch King chose to flee instead of continue the fight. When Eomer attempted to follow, he was stopped by Glorfindel, who would give a prophetic warning that we all know to come true. Do not pursue him. He will not return to these lands. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man shall he fall. So despite his defeat at the Battle of Fornost, the Witch King had actually accomplished his initial mission of destroying Arnor and taking revenge on the Dunedain. Over the next few years, the Nazgul would help Sauron strengthen his forces in Mordor, gathering huge armies of orcs. In 2002 of the Third Age, the Nazgul captured the Gondorian citadel of Minas Ithil, which later became known as Minas Morgul, the new home of the Witch King of Angmar. Then around 40 years later, the King of Gondor passed away, leaving his son Eomer, the Witch King's old nemesis, to inherit the throne. 7 years after his coronation, the Witch King challenged Eomer to single combat once more. He accepted and rode from Minas Tirith to Minas Morgul to fight the Nazgul Lord. He entered through the gates, but was never seen again. This ended the line of kings in Gondor, and the rule of stewards began. The Nazgul then remained quiet in Minas Morgul over the next 400 years. This was known as the period of time called the Watchful Peace. Although there was no conflict in this time, many people left the neighbouring lands of Ithilien due to the looming presence of the Nazgul. In 2475, when the Watchful Peace had recently ended, the Lord of Minas Morgul led an army of orcs and men from Haradrim into the capital city of Gondor, Osgiliath, and captured its eastern half, only stopped from full invasion by a few surviving Gondorians that destroyed their own bridge in an attempt to save the west side of the city. Then aside from a few more conflicts in Osgiliath, this pretty much brings us up to the key events from the War of the Ring. I'm going to summarise these parts pretty quickly, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with these points. So the Witch King was tasked with leading the Nazgul into the Shire to find the One Ring. The search led them to Weathertop, the watchtower that he had burned about 1,600 years earlier. Here he stabbed Frodo, the ring-bearer, with a Morgul blade before he was driven off by Aragorn. They gave chase to Frodo as he was en route to Rivendell to be healed by Lord Elrond. They were lured away by Glorfindel, another former foe of the Witch King. At the River Breenin, Lord Elrond summoned great waves that flooded the Nazgul, destroying their physical forms temporarily and killing their horses. This gave the forces of good much needed time to plan a strategy of attack, or form a fellowship. Upon their return to Mordor, Sauron gave the Nazgul their new mounts, great winged creatures called Fellbeasts. The 8 lesser Nazgul were ordered to continue their work in reconnaissance, and the Witch King returned to Minas Morgul to resume his position as the commander of Sauron's forces. He eventually led a force to fully conquer the remainder of Osgiliath that at this time was being defended by Faramir and his men. The attack was successful, and the forces of Mordor now had a full base to attack Minas Tirith from. On the 14th of March, which is my birthday by the way, 1319 of the Third Age, the battle for Minas Tirith began. The Black Captain led the forces through the gate, spreading fear wherever he went. At the gate he met with Gandalf the White. Here he removed his black hood and revealed just a crown. He drew his sword ready to fight Gandalf, but the sound of the horns of Rohan led the Ringwraith to withdraw to deal with this new threat. He mounted his fell beast and joined the battle. Here he took the opportunity to attack Theoden, King of Rohan, scaring his horse, which essentially ended up crushing the king. Before the Witch King could finish off King Theoden, Éowyn and Merry stood in his way. Merry stabbed the Witch King in the knee with a Númenórean sword, one of the only weapons in Middle-earth that could penetrate his defence. Éowyn then drove her sword into the Nazgul's head, bringing Glorfindel's prophecy to become true. He was killed not by a man, but a hobbit and a woman. So there we have it, guys. That's a full detailed video on the Witch King of Angmar, one of the coolest villains not only created by Tolkien, but ever, in my own opinion. My question for you guys today is this: if the Witch King had not withdrawn from his fight with Gandalf, what do you think the outcome would be? The movie obviously makes it look that he is far superior to the White Wizard, but I really don't think that's the case. I'd love to know your thoughts on this fight in the comments down below. Also, if you'd like to see a full video on King Éomer, let us know in the comments down below as well. Okay, time has come as always to thank our patrons and channel members. An extra special shout out goes to the members of our highest tiers: Lorenzo, Gregory, Nashith, John, Andrew, Denver Steel and Pirate747. And finally, we want to shout out our limited special tier on Patreon. Kevin, Abram, Matt, and Glorfindel of Gondolin, as members of this tier, you of course are all executive producers on our short film, and have been allowed to give feedback on the script. I very much hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for your continued support. If you aren't aware guys, 100% of support through Patreon is just going to the budget of our short film. So if you want to support that project, that is how you can do so. A very quick reminder before we go to check out our other channels, the 6th Ranger and History of Dragon Ball, for some nostalgic Power Rangers lore and anime lore. The links will be in the description down below if they are of any interest to you. I'm also going to point out to those of you that are interested that we are currently moving our gym. If you don't know, our office is actually inside a gym that we own. And as we are moving, there's a lot of changes going to happen. We will have a full-time filming setup and hopefully gaming table, so that's super exciting. If you would like to follow the move, you can check out our gym's YouTube page. It's just titled Flawless Combat Club. We've been documenting stuff on there. It's just a bit of fun, but if you fancy taking a look, go over to there and subscribe. Okay, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.